The coastline facing the eastern Indian Ocean stretches in long, uneven lines. In some places, it is flat and sandy. In others, it rises into low cliffs or breaks into mangrove swamps and river mouths. The shape of the shore is not fixed. It shifts with monsoon seasons, currents, and erosion, changing gradually over years rather than days. Late December marks the end of the northeast monsoon in much of the region. The air is warm and humid. Mornings arrive early, with light spreading quickly across the water. Fishing boats are often already returning by sunrise. Along beaches and headlands, people begin their day close to the sea, as they have for generations. On the morning of December 26, 2004, the ocean surface appeared ordinary. There were no storms offshore. The wind was light. The tide moved according to familiar patterns. Waves reached the shore and retreated without force. Nothing in the sky or along the horizon suggested urgency. The Indian Ocean itself is vast and deep, bordered by densely populated coastlines. Beneath it lies a complex system of tectonic plates. These plates move slowly, usually without notice. When they shift suddenly, the effects may travel far beyond the point of origin, crossing entire ocean basins. At the shoreline, this activity remains invisible. The water reflects the light of early morning. The sand is cool underfoot. The sea appears stable, even permanent. For those standing near it, the coast seems unchanged, as it had the day before. There is no sound yet beyond the usual. No signal that the shape of the land and the lives along it are about to be altered. The morning continues, calm and uninterrupted, holding its silence a little longer. By late December, coastal communities across South and Southeast Asia were moving through an ordinary holiday period. In parts of Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, daily routines followed patterns shaped by fishing cycles, tourism seasons, and local calendars. Many of the people closest to the shoreline had lived near the sea their entire lives. Fishing families in Aceh, on the northern tip of Sumatra, worked small boats launched directly from the beach. Nets were repaired in the shade. Engines were cleaned by hand. Knowledge of tides and currents was passed down informally, learned through repetition rather than instruction. Farther west, along the eastern coast of Sri Lanka, villages were arranged in narrow strips between the ocean and inland lagoons. The houses were often simple, built close together. The sea provided both food and income. It also set limits, defining where people built and how they moved. In southern Thailand, the coast supported a different rhythm. Resort towns had grown alongside older fishing settlements. Hotels faced the water. Small businesses catered to visitors who came for calm beaches and predictable weather. December was part of the high season. Many travelers were present, unfamiliar with local geography or warning signs tied to the sea. On India's southeastern coast, including Tamil Nadu and parts of Andhra Pradesh, fishing communities prepared for the day shortly after sunrise. Boats had gone out before dawn. Others were still on shore, sorting catches from the previous day or preparing equipment. Children played near the waterline. Markets were beginning to open. In most of these places, formal tsunami warning systems did not yet exist. Knowledge of such events was limited. In the Indian Ocean region, tsunamis were considered rare, historical occurrences rather than active risks. There were no sirens, no public drills, and no shared understanding of how quickly danger could arrive. People were present at the water's edge for ordinary reasons. They were working, traveling, resting, or watching the sea as part of daily life. The shoreline was a place of routine contact, not one associated with sudden disaster. This context shaped how the coming hours would unfold. When the ocean changed, there would be little time and few reference points to explain what was happening. At 7:58 local time, a powerful earthquake ruptured the boundary between the Indian Plate and the Burma Plate off the west coast of northern Sumatra. The rupture zone extended for more than 1,300 kilometers along the Sunda Trench. It was one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded, later measured at a moment magnitude between 9.1 and 9.3. The movement occurred deep beneath the ocean floor. Sections of the seabed were forced upward by several meters, displacing an enormous volume of water almost instantaneously. The energy released did not remain localized. It transferred into the ocean, generating waves that moved outward in all directions. Near the epicenter, the shaking was violent and prolonged. In Aceh, buildings collapsed, roads fractured, power and communications failed almost immediately. For those far from the source, the earthquake was not felt at all. The first effects they would encounter would arrive silently, carried across the water. A tsunami does not behave like ordinary surface waves. In deep water, its height may be barely noticeable, while its wavelength can stretch for hundreds of kilometers. The energy moves through the entire water column. As the wave approaches shallower coastal areas, it slows and rises, concentrating its force. Along some shorelines, the first sign was not an incoming surge, but a retreat. The sea pulled back rapidly, exposing reefs, rocks, and seabed that were normally submerged. In places, the water receded hundreds of meters. This occurred within minutes of the earthquake, long before any official warning could have been issued. Reactions varied. Some people moved closer to the water, curious. Others sensed that something was wrong, but did not understand the scale of the threat. There was no shared framework to interpret the behavior of the sea. The point of no return passed quickly. Once the waves were formed and moving, there was no practical way to stop or redirect them. Coastlines across the Indian Ocean were now linked by the same advancing force, traveling at speeds comparable to a commercial jet. The interval between cause and consequence was short. In many locations, the ocean would arrive before information could. For those caught along the hardest-hit shores, survival became a matter of immediate observation, improvisation, and disciplined action. The initial surge destroyed homes, roads, and familiar landmarks. In its place was a landscape unrecognizable, shattered wooden frames, overturned vehicles, and mangled trees. The coastline was no longer predictable. Water channels ran in unfamiliar directions, leaving debris-strewn paths in their wake. The survivors who endured did so by focusing on simple, repeatable strategies. Shelter was improvised from what remained: intact sections of buildings, large fragments of furniture, or raised landforms that were above the surge line. Some found refuge on small elevated hills, while others clung to floating debris. The principle was consistent: remain above the waterline and avoid unstable structures that could collapse under further waves. Food was scarce. In the first days, any available supplies salvaged from wreckage became essential. Stored rice, canned goods, and bottles of water were distributed cautiously. Fishing became a secondary option, so though equipment was often destroyed and the sea itself remained hazardous. Foraging inland required assessment of stability. Mud, fallen trees, and scattered debris concealed potential dangers. Communication and coordination were key. Small groups formed spontaneously, combining knowledge of local geography and prior experience. They established watch rotations, particularly at night, to monitor water levels and identify safe paths. Individuals with prior experience in fishing or construction naturally assumed leadership roles, organizing efforts to move people and supplies efficiently. Discipline became central to survival. Panic or hasty movement often led to injuries. Those who survived tended to maintain a mental schedule, rationing supplies, resting at intervals, and keeping track of weather and tide conditions. The systematic approach prevented exhaustion and reduced the risk of further accidents. Over time, adaptation became visible in behavior and environment. Makeshift shelters were reinforced using debris from collapsed structures. Water collection relied on natural runoff or salvageable containers. Cooking and heating were improvised over small fires built in sheltered spaces, carefully monitored to avoid accidental spread in the debris field. Mental strategies were equally important. Survivors documented conditions, tracked movements of waves, and observed the behavior of local fauna, particularly birds, which sometimes indicated safer routes inland. Vigilance and incremental learning allowed groups to avoid repeating mistakes, even in a rapidly changing environment. Days merged into weeks. The initial chaos gave way to routine, is shaped by necessity. The survivor's world became a narrow focus, securing basic needs, avoiding injury, and preserving energy. Each action was deliberate, each observation recorded, consciously or not. The tsunami had altered the coastline permanently. Rivers, estuaries, and paths inland had shifted, sometimes blocking known routes or creating new hazards. Yet, within this instability, systematic survival created order. Knowledge was acquired not through comfort, but through immediate, practical response to the environment. As days turned into weeks, the limits of human endurance became increasingly evident. The initial injuries inflicted by the waves, cuts, bruises, and broken bones, remained untreated. Infection became a constant threat. Waterborne diseases exacerbated by standing water and damaged sanitation systems. It began to claim their toll. Simple tasks that had once seemed manageable grew arduous. Attempts to reach areas thought to hold supplies or survivors often ended in failure. Paths were blocked by mud, debris, and collapsed structures. Flooded fields and fractured roads made travel unpredictable. Some groups underestimated the distance to safety or overestimated their strength, resulting in exhaustion or injury. A few never returned from these excursions. Nutrition became an acute concern. Salvaged rations dwindled quickly. Foraging inland introduced further risk. Fallen trees, unstable soil, and hidden debris made every step hazardous. When scavenged food ran out, survivors were forced to supplement with fish or shellfish, often under dangerous conditions near turbulent waters. Not all catches were edible. Spoilage and contamination led to illness in several cases. Psychological pressure intensified. Time blurred as survivors lost track of days and nights amid the debris field. Sleep was broken and sporadic, interrupted by noise, environmental hazards, or the need to remain vigilant. Anxiety and fear became pervasive. Even among small groups, disagreements over decisions, routes to attempt, distribution of scarce resources, or the care of the sick and injured added strain. Deaths occurred quietly but continuously. Some succumbed to injuries or illness. Others were overtaken by exhaustion or exposure. Observing these losses reinforced the urgency of measured, disciplined action, but could not eliminate the inevitable toll. Each death reduced available labor, diminished morale, and created new logistical challenges. Environmental factors compounded human vulnerability. Heavy rains further destabilized the terrain. Flooded areas expanded, cutting off escape routes. Wind and intermittent waves threatened makeshift shelters. Even those who had survived the first wave of the tsunami had to confront a persistent, unpredictable environment. Survivors adapted incrementally, yet failure was always present at the edge of every decision. Crossing a debris-strewn river could result in drowning. Attempting to harvest food from partially submerged areas risked injury. The margin for error was narrow. Observation, experience, and cautious experimentation guided daily choices, but they could not erase loss entirely. This period, spanning roughly 2 to 3 weeks after the tsunami, became a test of both physical endurance and disciplined decision-making. Those who maintained structured routines, rationing, rotating responsibilities, and prioritizing safety, had a higher chance of persisting. Those who faltered, either by overexertion or misjudgment, often suffered irreversible consequences. The cumulative effect of injuries, inadequate nutrition, and constant stress brought survivors to the brink. Time seemed suspended. Each day mirrored the last. Careful navigation, continual assessment of danger, minimal movement, and vigilant observation. Life on the broken coastline became a continuous negotiation with the environment. After approximately 3 weeks, the situation began to shift, though without any sudden relief. Rescue did not arrive as a dramatic intervention, but as a gradual reconnection to functional emergency services. Local authorities, coordinated with international aid teams, began to reach isolated pockets of survivors along the fractured coastline. The process of rescue was methodical. Boats navigated carefully through debris-strewn waters, assessing stability and currents. Helicopters provided aerial reconnaissance, identifying clusters of people stranded on higher ground or amidst partially submerged structures. Evacuation required patience. Moving too quickly risked further injury. Survivors were brought to temporary shelters established on relatively intact land. These spaces were sparse and functional: tents, medical stations, and communal feeding areas. No celebration occurred. The emphasis remained on stabilization, treating injuries, preventing infection, and providing sufficient nutrition and hydration. Medical teams encountered a wide range of conditions. Lacerations and broken bones needed urgent care. Malnutrition and dehydration required careful monitoring. Many survivors displayed symptoms of hypothermia, exhaustion, and stress-induced ailments. Psychological support began quietly, in parallel with physical care, to address the persistent anxiety and trauma. Communication with family and other survivors unfolded slowly. Many had lost contact entirely, making confirmation of safety a gradual process. Those rescued were moved in groups to centralized aid stations, where record-keeping, food distribution, and triage could occur systematically. The scale of destruction remained evident. Buildings were still flattened or submerged, roads remained impassable, and the natural landscape was permanently altered. Survival was not complete restoration. It was stabilization amid ongoing disruption. Those who had endured the initial disaster continued to contend with aftereffects. Weakened infrastructure, limited supplies, and uncertainty about long-term safety. No dramatic reunions or public declarations marked this period. Relief existed in the form of continued survival, medical treatment, and slow reintroduction to relative safety. Daily life resumed cautiously, guided by necessity rather than celebration. Survivors began the process of documenting their experience, primarily to assist ongoing rescue and recovery efforts. Their accounts informed the management of debris, the location of additional survivors, and strategies for sustainable food and water distribution. In this resolution phase, the narrative of survival was quiet. Life was preserved, but conditions remained constrained. The coastline itself, once familiar, had become a landscape of altered geography and enduring hazard. Survival was no longer an immediate struggle against nature, but a careful negotiation with recovery and adaptation. The experience of surviving the Boxing Day tsunami on the broken coastline offers a stark perspective on human endurance. The event was not a single moment of heroism, but a series of sustained efforts to remain alive under relentless environmental pressure. Historically, this disaster highlighted the vulnerabilities of coastal communities in the face of sudden, large-scale natural events. Infrastructure, communication systems, and emergency preparedness were tested to their limits. Yet, amid destruction, the accounts of those who survived reveal a quiet resilience, the ability to adapt, to improvise, and to endure in isolation for days without immediate external support. The survival of these individuals underscores a simple, persistent truth. Human life in extreme conditions depends less on dramatic intervention than on steady, disciplined responses to immediate needs. Finding water, securing food, maintaining warmth, and preserving hope. The choices made in these first critical hours, repeated day by day, determined outcomes. For observers, the story carries lessons that extend beyond a single coastline. It demonstrates the value of preparation, the necessity of knowledge about one's environment, and the capacity for communal effort in sustaining life. The disaster prompted improvements in early warning systems, community evacuation plans, and the integration of scientific monitoring into daily life in vulnerable regions. On a human level, the narrative closes quietly. Survivors returned to their lives transformed. Homes were rebuilt, but the memory of the broken coastline, the relentless surge of water, and the endurance required to survive remained embedded. There was no ceremonial closure, no definitive triumph, only the continuation of life, altered yet intact. The significance of this survival story lies not in spectacle, but in the testimony it provides, that ordinary individuals, faced with extraordinary conditions, can persevere. History records not only the scale of destruction, but also the human response, careful, disciplined, and enduring. In the silence that follows the recounting of these events, the true measure of survival is evident, not in dramatic rescue, but in life sustained against the persistent forces of nature. It is a quiet affirmation of resilience, a reminder that endurance often manifests in the most unassuming, persistent ways.